What do the big data tech gurus think about what's in store for the future? Why don't you grab your favorite brew?
Cheers. Cheers.
Sit back and catch this week's special episode of Big Data and Brews.
What's the future? Where do we go? I mean, you talk a little about Storm and Spark, Yarn, obviously, but where do you see Hadoop, maybe 5 years from now even?
Well, there's kind of two, I'm spending a lot of time right now thinking about the future of Hadoop, and there's kind of two mega trends that I'm really sort of noodling on. There's a whole list of features I could give you, but that's probably another talk. One mega trend is just how are cloud and Hadoop going to converge?
Yeah.
I think that's there's a 20-minute segment right there.
Yeah.
But I think that's really interesting. If you look at it, Amazon and Google, right, are two mature, proprietary systems that kind of show the two ways it could go. Right? Amazon is a cloud first, and people are having a lot of success running Hadoop on it. Google built an HPC infrastructure with a real focus on supporting things like MapReduce, and that had a HDFS-like storage infrastructure first, and now they do cloud-like things on top of it. Right? They run all their services in effectively a Hadoop-like system, right? Or at least an HPC scheduler-like system. So, how are these open source ecosystems going to converge OpenStack, Hadoop, and all of the various projects in there? And I think that's really wide open, right? Right now, neither project does what the other set of projects need, but IT managers don't want both.
Yeah.
Right? They want one common place to store all the data, and one common way to compute all the data, and one common way to allocate resources to projects.
Right.
So
they want to plug in the wall where they just put in, this is my storage and compute, and it's a utility.
Exactly. So they think that thing is going to be called OpenStack.
Okay.
But Hadoop is actually getting deployed in a lot more places at a lot more scale
than OpenStack.
And so how's that story going to end?
Right.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
So, but there's a lot of speculation you can do there. The other real mega trend is, I think, when we started Hortonworks, we talked about how important it was that the community not fragment, that there be one distribution of Hadoop.
Yeah.
Right. And, that's a noble goal. But this, someone was following me around at a conference the other day saying, admit it, the Hadoop community is fragmented, the Hadoop community is fragmented. And, we kind of got in this long argument. And ultimately I said, well, so what?
Yeah.
Right? I think, yes, in some ways the Hadoop community, we can argue about how much it's this way and how long it's going to last, but I think the Hadoop community is kind of going into a Unix decade.
Yeah.
Right? So if you look at the Unix ecosystem, the Unix APIs came out pretty early. There was the AT&T Unix version. And then, there was the Berkeley Unix version, and then there was every vendor's Unix version. Yeah. And one could argue that this was a terrible thing, that Unix evolved much more slowly than it might have if there'd been one.
Right.
And that,
it's evolution.
Yeah, you could argue that too. And that everybody was slowed down because as a vendor, if you wanted to write an application for Unix, you had to write it for every one. You could look at it that way, and you can look at the SQL ecosystem and say the same thing. Wouldn't it be terrific if all the SQLs were the same? Because then all the people that write SQL apps would have less work to do. Or you could turn around and say, well, wait a second. Look at those huge ecosystems, right? If you look at the Unix ecosystem, Unix went from an unknown thing to the
multi-billion market, and a lot of technology innovation in the different areas.
And the default sort of ecosystem on which systems infrastructure was built during that Unix decade.
Right.
So I think Hadoop's going to see the same thing. I don't know. I'm of course a big fan of Apache Hadoop and hope that everybody does continue to base all of their work on that.
Yeah.
But whether or not they do, the APIs of Hadoop are being supported by more and more vendors and more products and more distros, be they pure or not pure, all the time. And as a result, I think what's really interesting over the next few years is what are people going to do with Hadoop?
Right.
What is that, that ecosystem that's forming above Hadoop? And if that does really well, that just drives more of all the Hadoops, and then that creates more and more opportunity.
Great.
So yeah, that's very exciting to watch and see.
So outside of Hadoop, what are other open source projects? Maybe as a final question, what are other open source projects you see that you're really excited about, or that you maybe consider to incorporate, or that you think have a great future?
I think JavaScript has a great future.
Yeah. Okay.
I think when I'm gonna.
Did you look into Reno and those kind of platforms that run JavaScript server side? Do you know Reno? It's from the.
I looked into Node.
Okay, Node.js, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I think Reno is something I had on my to-do list, but I don't think I've had time to get to.
So we're using this actually to push some JavaScript code down back to the server. It's kind of similar to what Node.js and those kind of things do. But yeah, so we basically run D3 visualization on the server side with Reno, and Reno is basically Mozilla. I think a Mozilla project.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And if you look at the trajectory, Java started on appliances. Before it was a language for applets. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know why they moved it. They needed a language for applets at Sun. It became a language for applets. It completely, totally bombed there. It failed drastic. I don't think I've seen an applet in 5 years or something. But then it became a server side, and now there's all the Hadoop thing is based on Java. I think JavaScript is following a similar trajectory. Of course, I don't have the crystal ball, but the tools are getting better.
But you have R.
I can try to model it over two examples. So we'll see. It's already moving on the server side. It has interesting tools. It has a lot of people working on interpreters so that you can write crappy code and it's going to run fast anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think
there's a lot of investment put into JavaScript optimization by companies like Google and Apple.
I think some of the brightest minds in languages these days are employed in one of those three groups that are doing JavaScript. And there's companies like Meta Markets that are based on JavaScript. They're upfront about it. We run JavaScript on server and client side because it's simpler.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Fast enough for us.
So, Justin, what's coming next in the market? What do you think? Like, what's the future in big data? Obviously, it's SQL. Sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah, but what do you think are some of the trends that you're keeping a close eye on? Is it the in-memory stuff? Is it do we need to do more on the file system area? Is it more kind of the access? What do you think is the next thing?
Yeah, great question. I think certainly all of those are interesting areas. In-memory certainly has its place. I think some of the things that we're most interested in and keeping an eye on is this notion of, you sort of have Hadoop. Again, I'll draw my bad handwriting.
You didn't saw mine yet.
And you've got HDFS in here, and very often people are using this as a landing environment, a data reservoir, data lake.
Yeah.
Pick your favorite word, right?
Yeah.
And then ultimately they're doing some ETL, and they use Hadoop as effectively fancy ETL, and then they push it into a database, a traditional database. Maybe that's Teradata or what have you. And so we're constantly focused on increasingly what is driving people to actually kind of skip this step. Right. And leave that data in here, and what's missing to kind of prevent that, because that's the ultimate kind of future we believe in. And certainly we founded the company on that, of doing all of your analytics in one place in this data reservoir. And so some interesting things there we think are making ETL a thing of the past to a certain degree. I mean,
we're on the same page here.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's one area where we keep an eye on, things that we invest in from an IP perspective to try to make that easier, make that more accessible. Certainly our vision is effectively bringing database technology into Hadoop, and that's sort of what Hadapt is all about. So, continuing to watch that. Also watching what the rest of the ecosystem is doing from a maturity around resource management with Yarn, but also security. Increasingly as Hadoop goes production in major enterprise customers, these are the kinds of things that aren't always the sexy things that the engineers are like, this is great, but you have to build it anyways. It's also something we pay
Yeah,
attention
security.
to. Yeah.
We see a lot.
Yeah.
Are there, to come back to kind of that observation, because we see that too, right? So that Hadoop becomes the melting pot for all the data, but then, if it's valuable insights, people still pushing into databases.
Right.
Why do you think is this? Is that because you have a BI system sitting on top of the database that's working well, that's maybe already integrated, or are people just feeling more comfortable having data clean and structured? Because you could argue, hey, I just land all the data in there, and instead of cleaning the data, transforming the data, I just do a view of the data, right? So kind of the view concept from databases, where my view is the cleaning of the data, and the advantage would be if I change my mind what clean data means, I would just change the view, right? Aren't we at the point that we have enough storage and compute to handle everything as a view?
Right. I mean, I certainly believe that's coming, and hopefully not too far away. But I think the challenge still for a lot of people is that these sort of existing legacy platforms have so much functionality already built into them that Hadoop hasn't been able to duplicate yet. And to your point, BI tools is one common way that people want to interact with that data. And these tools don't work perfectly seamlessly with Hadoop yet today. Things like doing deletes or updates, for that matter.
And you guys do that, deletes and updates?
Not yet, but very shortly. I mean, that's something that we're working on, and again, something that we think we'll be able to implement much more quickly, given our kind of DBMS component of our architecture than the open source vendors that are trying to reinvent the wheel. To your point earlier.
Yeah.